The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Well, welcome everybody. Welcome to the second webinar on the 5 Conversations framework. We're actually going to be looking at the strengths and talents conversation today. I just want to make sure before we go any further that I can be heard, because last thing I want to do is be sitting here speaking to myself. So if you could just go over to the right-hand side under the question box and just type in clear, that would be very helpful for me so that I know that I'm not talking to myself. Thanks, Tony. Okay, anybody else? Okay, well, I'm assuming that I'm being heard, so that's great. Okay, so this is being recorded, so you've got an opportunity to look in the ShareSource site and be able to review this particular webinar. It's only a 30-minute webinar. I just really want to introduce to you the second of the 5 conversations, what the questions are, and perhaps even to respond to some of your questions. So at this stage, you should have got through your first conversation, which is the climate review conversation. And I've had a bit of feedback from a number of people, and some of the feedback is that the conversation went a little longer than perhaps we had indicated. That's not necessarily a bad thing. Obviously, it depends on what you're talking about. There might be things that require a little bit more conversation, and that's fine. I think you'll find that this conversation, which only has 3 questions in it, shouldn't necessarily go any longer than 15 minutes. But again, if it does, it's because you make that decision to do that, or both of you do. So, but really, the whole purpose is designed to be fairly short, very focused conversations on specific themes. And of course, the theme today is strengths and talents conversation. All right, so let's get underway and have a look at what we'll be covering. Basically, this will come up on your screen shortly. There it is. We'll be covering the framework again. So what are the 5 conversations in the framework? I want to spend a little bit of time early on actually talking about the purpose of the 5 conversations framework, because I had a little bit of feedback to indicate that people weren't really aware of what the purpose was, and that's fair enough. I need to probably explain that several times to people as to why we're doing this and what's the benefits for you, whether you happen to be in a leadership role or on the receiving end of a conversation, or both. I obviously want to spend a bit of time talking about the strengths and talents conversation, and what I'm really wanting to focus on there, of course, is mainly the questions and how you might approach those questions, and then, of course, some tips and hints. So whether you're on the receiving end of the conversation or you're actually facilitating the conversation, I want to talk about some tips and hints there that might assist you as well. So we'll cover that as well. So let's have a look. Now, let me just spend a bit of time talking about the purpose of why we're doing this the 5 conversations framework and what the real essence of it is. This is not a performance review. That's the first thing I should say about it. It's not a performance review. It's actually a series of developmental conversations. So the real purpose, I think, is threefold. One of the reasons that we're doing this, and we're trialing it with you guys, but one of the reasons we're doing this is that we want to build up higher levels of trust. There's a high correlation between trust and the amount of conversing that people do. And whilst all of you obviously talk to each other in relation to projects and technical issues, I don't doubt that for a minute, that doesn't necessarily build trust up. I mean, it can. You could also lose trust depending on what's being said. So there's really 2 types of conversations that we've got in the workplace. There are people-focused conversations and there are task-focused conversations. I'd be willing to bet that the vast majority of your conversations are task-focused, and I'm not suggesting they shouldn't be. But what we're actually trying to do with the 5 conversations is balance that up a little bit, so we've got people-focused conversations occurring as well. And so what do people-focused conversations do? Well, they hopefully build a level of trust because there's a level of alignment or agreement of perspective. It actually helps to create some synergy. And what I mean by that is that in many of these conversations, there'll be things that you can agree on. And they're probably things that you already have agreed on, but probably haven't talked about. So by having the conversation, it's more overt. And we actually understand how the other person's thinking, how they view their job, how they view their development, how they view their performance. All of those things are critically important. And of course, the most practical thing out of the 5 conversations is it provides you with some ways and means of assisting people to excel in their particular work. And really, that's pretty much the fundamentals of it. So you can see that for a small investment of time, we can achieve quite a lot. And so I think if you happen to be a leader and you have received that question during the first conversation, perhaps you might just point out that this is really about building trust, creating some synergy, and looking for ways and means of assisting the person to excel in their work. That's really the essence of what it is. Of course, if you're on the receiving end and you're wondering why we're doing this, and perhaps you haven't come to some of the briefing sessions for whatever reason, then there it is. That's the reason that we're doing this. Because it's true to say that in the majority of cases, all across the world, across all industries, because of technology and a whole range of other reasons, we're not having enough conversations, particularly the people-focused conversations. So we're just trying to balance that up. So I hope that's clear what we're attempting to do there. But if it isn't, just type in a question there, or you've got a statement there. I'm more than happy to respond to this as we go through this presentation this morning. So getting specific about the strengths and talents conversation, what we're attempting to do here is a couple of things. We're starting on an upward spiral of positivity. In other words, we're starting with what people are innately talented at rather than what perhaps they're not performing in. We start on a positive basis because what happens is that we don't use people's strengths enough in the workplace. We often give them a job description, give them some projects to work on, and off they go. But often we don't consider what people are innately talented at. And we do know that there's a high correlation between what people actually enjoy in their work and perhaps what they're good at. There seems to be a high correlation there. So what we need to try and do is tap into what people actually enjoy in their work. And as a result of that, we can then start to, if possible, and we may not be able to do this, certainly in the first instance, is to try to allocate work and responsibilities that dovetail nicely into that strength. Because then what you're likely to do is to get greater job satisfaction, and more importantly than that even, is that you're probably likely to get a better result because the person actually enjoys that kind of work. So it just allows the manager to be mindful of the strengths and talents that he has or she has available in their team, and to be able to use them and exercise them as effectively as possible. So that's pretty much the reason to establish the work assignments that people enjoy and to be mindful of that information if and when assignments arise where you can actually delegate that to people on the basis of them having a strength there. The argument is, of course, if we spend more time working on our strengths rather than our weaknesses, we'll get a greater result. And that's because we've got an aptitude for working in those areas. So, for example, in another industry, people who are very good at stakeholder management, and maybe in your industry, and I know you deal with a lot of stakeholders in the work that you do, if you're good at that stakeholder engagement, then it would be a good opportunity to try to give that person more scope and opportunity to to utilize that talent because they enjoy it and they're good at it. Or if there's a particular technical assignment that somebody excels in, we can be mindful to consider utilizing that strength if and when that opportunity arises. So that's just in essence what this conversation's about. You should find it a very pleasant conversation. Again, what happens is that the person or yourself comes to the conversation forewarned, so you actually know what questions your leader's going to ask you, so you can really prepare for that, and that's important because that adds to a richer conversation. All right, so just you've seen this no doubt before, this framework, but you can see that there are 5 conversations in this framework, and we are attempting to get each of these conversations done in a month. So I'd encourage you all to try to book in this conversation as quickly as possible and get it done so we can move on to the next conversation and it's done. We don't want a mad rush at the end of the month and people running around spending the day having conversations on the last day of the month in order to get ready for the next month. So start early, get it done, and I'd encourage you, if you are on the receiving end of a conversation, to just go to your manager, go to your team leader, and suggest to them that you'd like to have your conversation on strengths and talents as soon as possible and book a time. And of course, if you're a team leader or a manager, the idea is for you to go and book those as quickly as possible and get them done. As I said, they're not onerous, and certainly this one won't be onerous because you've only got 3 questions basically in the conversation, albeit they're all important questions. So you can see there in the second column, we've dealt with the climate review. We are now in the strengths and talents phase, and next month we will look at opportunities for growth, which is of course looking at the areas where there needs to be improvement in. And then we will move to a learning and development conversation, and the learning and development questions will very much revolve around the information that's come out of conversations 2 and 3, that is the strengths and opportunities for growth. And the final conversation will be the conversation on innovation and continuous improvement. So ways and means of making the organisation, your work area, more efficient and effective. So that's quite exciting to think that everyone will be involved in a conversation around innovation and continuous improvement in the 1 month. That will generate undoubtedly some great ideas that will that can be implemented fairly easily and painlessly, and obviously add some degree of efficiency or effectiveness to the organisation. So that's the 5 conversations framework, and you can see each time we have one of these, I will review this so that you can kind of get a roadmap on where we're actually travelling from. I might just pause there and just ask anyone if you've got any questions. Happy to hear them. I can't obviously unmute everybody because there'll be too much noise and distraction, but if you would like to type in a question under the question box there, or a statement or an observation that you've made so far in the process, I'm more than happy to take those. So go for your life and type them in. All right. Okay, just while I'm waiting for that, I think we'll move on and have a look at the 3 questions in relation to the 5 conversations. The 3 questions relating to the strengths and talents conversation. Now, there is only 3 questions, and I've said this before in some of our group coaching sessions. The idea is not, of course, to sit there and to read these questions off. That's not really what this is about. This is about having a relaxed but focused conversation. So sure, you might take these questions with you if you're going out for a coffee, but you don't read them off, obviously. That's not the idea. The idea is obviously you paraphrase them, but it's fairly straightforward questions. But these questions are designed to create a better conversation experience. So that's why we've given you these questions to work with. And as I said before, if you're on the receiving end of a conversation, and everyone should be in this webinar, you need to go to your conversation having given some consideration to each of these questions, because that adds to a richer conversation. So there's a little bit of homework there just to consider some of these questions. And of course, you can do that today, right here, right now. So the first question is very much around what tasks do you enjoy mostly in your current job? Now, as I said before, there's a high correlation between what we enjoy doing and what we naturally are good at. So the things, not always the case, of course, but there is a high correlation. So the things that you and I enjoy doing day to day are probably things that we have a natural talent in. I mean, the flip side's true too. The things that we don't enjoy, and there's plenty of those, I'm sure we could identify some of those. But the things that we don't enjoy are probably the things that we aren't naturally gifted at or talented at. So that's a good way to start the conversation, because if we can start talking about what people enjoy doing, we're really honing in on what people are naturally talented at. So, it could be anything. It could be I enjoy stakeholder engagement, or I enjoy problem solving, or I enjoy this particular type of project, or in the last 6 months we rolled out this particular program and I thoroughly enjoyed that. Whatever the answer is, you need to give some thought to that one as well. Obviously, it's a little problematic if you can't think of anything, but I'm sure if you put some thought into it, there'd be something that you enjoy doing or have been doing relatively recently. And so once that's been put on the table, the second question, of course, is pretty much around why do you enjoy doing those tasks? And look, the reason for that question is pretty straightforward. I mean, the reason why you're asking why do you enjoy those tasks is so that it gives the team leader or the manager an opportunity to understand what specifically it was about that particular project or that problem or that challenge that the person actually enjoyed. So that's the reason for that. And of course, what that does is it boils down to the essence of what it is about that particular task that the individual enjoyed doing. So have a good conversation about that. There might be several things that come up in that, and I hope it does. I hope there's not just one thing. I hope there are several things that you've enjoyed. It's highly likely that there'll be a theme running through those, and that's what the second question's about, is to give people an opportunity to consider the themes around those. And I guess the third question is the very practical question, and it may not be able to be achieved at the moment, but the question is, in your current role, how can we work together to provide you with the opportunities to do more of that type of work? Now, it's quite possible that the answer to that is don't know, but what we're trying to do is at least open up the option of how the team leader or manager might be able to be more mindful to provide more of that in the future. So it is really, the essence of this is to try to utilize your strengths and your talents more effectively in the work you're currently doing and also doing in the future. So that's really what that question is attempting to do. Now, there may not be, as I said, a definitive answer, but at least we put on the table what people enjoy doing, why they enjoy it, and then, of course, the team leader or the manager is in a strong position then to be able to consider how he or she may be able to utilize that strength and talent in future tasks or projects. So that's it, and that's pretty much 3 simple questions. And so obviously you can elaborate on those. I mean, the whole idea is to have a genuine conversation about that. It's not just a process of getting through the 3 questions and then what do we do next. So hopefully that's going to open up a doorway for a better conversation around using people's innate talents. All right, so if there's any questions about that, guys, type them in and I'll certainly respond to them right now. And I do want to finish up. We've got about 5 or so minutes. I just want to finish up talking about some of the tips and hints to make these conversations richer, more effective for you, whether you're on the receiving end or whether you're facilitating them. So on the left-hand side, I've put a couple of tips, and I call the person on the receiving end, in this case the coachee and the coach. You can call it whatever you like, but it's the person that's on the receiving end of the conversation nevertheless. So the first obvious thing that you can do to have a better conversation is to prepare. So look over the questions. Tony's going to send out a list, if he hasn't already, of the questions so that you can get a good handle on what those questions are going to be. And of course, you've seen those today, so there's only 3. So have a think about them, and we want you to think about them. And then, you know, it's not necessarily up to the team leader to book these meetings or the manager. It's really up to either party. So take the initiative and go and book the conversation. Get straight off this webinar at 11:30 and go and book that time with your team leader if you happen to be on the receiving end. And of course, if you're a leader in this webinar, then book them straight after. Look, the whole purpose of the process is to be constructive and open-minded. So the whole idea is for you to have an open-minded and constructive conversation. And it's a conversation that you're probably not normally going to have. So that doesn't necessarily mean it's not important either. But as I said before, we have so much emphasis on the task-focused conversations and very little on the people-focused conversations. So be constructive, be open-minded. The 4th point there is agree to disagree. You know, if you don't agree, then agree to disagree. I mean, this is not all about us agreeing on everything, because that's not necessarily practical. There will be things that we just disagree on, and just it's worth talking about those things. Get them out in the open. It doesn't have to be an argument or anything like that. It's just agree to disagree in a constructive and open-minded way. And look, the important thing to remember about this, and I'll keep mentioning it, is it's not a performance review. We're not sitting down monitoring people's performance. This is about, as I said before, building trust and synergy. It's about giving people an opportunity to talk about their own particular development. So please understand, it's not supposed to be something difficult. That's why I often think it's a good idea to have that in, outside. You don't need to have these conversations in the office. Go out and have a cup of coffee and do it over a cup of coffee, or if you're not a coffee drinker, whatever. So from the point of view of the person who happens to be running these conversations, a couple of key points for you to think about in this webinar before you launch into the second conversation. And by the way, these things will get easier and easier as you get more and more practice. But obviously, consider the questions from your own perspective. So, you've only got 3 to remember there, but obviously consider those. You might want to jot them down on a piece of paper or take a laptop or whatever with you. But the point I want to make is it's not about reading these off. You just simply ask those questions in your own words and just wait to hear what you get back, and then basically just have a conversation about whatever comes up. So as the coach, you can book a time. and a place that's mutually suitable. Try and stick to your commitment. It's a good idea that once you have that in the diary, it's in the diary, because if you start cancelling it or whatever, you're indicating to the other person that other things are more important than these conversations. Although that may well be true, the bottom line is it doesn't send a very good message or signal to the other person if you're cancelling your conversations each time. As I said before, consider meeting out of the office. There's no reason why you have to meet in the office. And in fact, sometimes you'll have a better conversation outside the office because people tend to be a little bit more relaxed. And this is supposed to be a relaxed conversation. This is not supposed to be some tense review, as I said before. Don't read the questions off. It is not the idea of it. The idea of the questions is just to give you a prompt. So remember, what is it that you enjoy about your work? Why do you enjoy why do you enjoy those tasks? And thirdly, is there any way we can utilize those skills in your current or future work in this role? So I've just paraphrased those 3 questions right there. So pretty straightforward. Be patient, I should say, and allow the other person to elaborate on their responses. So, it's a two-way conversation, is a two-way dialogue. So allow the other person to comment. By all means, you might have to give them a prompter, ask them some open-ended questions. Why did you say that? Or what do you mean? Or can you give me an example? Or those sorts of statements allow the person to elaborate a little bit more on their response. And some people, of course, are quieter than others, and we understand that. So you might have to prompt some people to speak up a little bit. Other people, of course, that won't be a challenge. It might be a case of how do I shut the person up? But as I said before, the conversation shouldn't necessarily need to last more than 15 minutes, but if it does, it's probably because you've gone off and talked about something in more detail, and there's perhaps nothing wrong with that, provided, of course, it's relevant to both parties. All right, so be patient, allow the person to elaborate, don't answer your own question, give people a chance to absorb the information, bearing in mind they should come to those conversations having already thought about the 3 questions, and that is helpful. Be respectfully curious, and that's a nice phrase, respectfully curious. Ask questions like, why did you say that? What did you mean? Where did it take place? Who are you referring to? How do you intend to do that? And which particular project are you referring to? These questions will create a better dialogue between both of you, and that's the whole purpose of that, is to open up a conversation based on 3 key questions. So that's pretty much it from me. You're very quiet today. Either I've explained it really well or there's some shy people online, but never mind. If you've got any other questions, Tony does do a very good job at collecting feedback and sending it through to me, so I do get some really good information. So guys, that's pretty much it from me. So enjoy the second of the 5 conversations, the strengths and talents conversation, and I look forward to getting your feedback. So thanks guys, and I look forward to hearing from you at some stage. Bye for now.